Hello, and welcome to Week 10, Chapter 22 and 23. Chapter 22 is all about hemic, lymphatic, mediastinum, and diaphragm. Please turn to page 641 in your textbook. And page 255 in your CPT book. This is a recorded class, so it will not be 3 hours in length. I had to cancel class last week, and I apologize for that. I am still under the weather and not feeling too well, so I will get through this lecture, hopefully, so that you can hear me and understand what I am talking about. This week, on page 642 for Chapter 22, what are the 5 regions of lymph nodes of the neck and group that is included in that region? Can anybody tell me? There are 5 regions, and these are what we would be looking for. Region 1 is the submental and submandibular group. Region 2, upper jugular group. Region 3, middle jugular group. Region 4, lower jugular group. And Region 5, posterior triangle group. I just wanted to throw that out there, see if anyone knew that question. So let's get started. You will notice that in this section in your CPT book, the divisions for this section will be spleen, general, lymph nodes, and lymphatic channels. The subheadings, you will see them in red. So your headings are in green and your subheadings will be in red. The further division that you see will be based on the type of procedure, such as excision, incision, or repair. And you will find that the lymph nodes are located in the CPT manual index under the main terms spleen, lymph nodes, and bone marrow. On page 643 in your textbook, you'll notice that the codes for spleen are further divided into excision, repair, laparoscopy, and introduction. Now, many times we hear that a person has had to have their spleen removed. So why can a person live without a spleen? That is because the bone marrow, liver, and lymph nodes take over the work of the spleen. Often this is done as part of a major procedure, and you'll notice that it is bundled into the major procedure. A splenectomy often carries with it the designation that this is a separate procedure. So if the splenectomy is an integral part of another procedure, it is bundled into the main procedure code and it is not reported separately. You will notice that codes are divided based on the following: aspiration, biopsy, harvesting, and transplantation and infusion. What is a needle biopsy? What is a bone marrow needle aspiration? it is when you have bone marrow withdrawn by a needle from a marrow cavity. So what would be involved in a bone marrow biopsy? You would have small pieces of the marrow that are withdrawn, and the lab would dissolve these in a solution, and then the substance would be analyzed. Over on page 44 at the top of the page. Bone marrow harvesting is where a larger amount of marrow is aspirated from a donor. So how would we transplant bone marrow? It would be taken from the donor and then injected into the recipient. Underneath your general subheading, we have types of cells that are called allogenic and autologous. The allogenic is from the same species, such as a close relative. Autologous is a patient's own cell. The hematopoietic progenitor cells, HPC, these are collected from the bone marrow. We're still at the top of page 644 in your textbook. So your autologous cells are collected from the patient and they are reinfused later into the same patient. So why do you think it would be advantageous to collect stem cells from a close relative? Because usually they are genetically similar. And you would find the codes for harvesting and return of blood to the donor under 38205 and 38206. Your lymph nodes and lymphatic channels on page 257 in your CPT book and on page 644 in your textbook. What is the purpose of the lymphatic system? It is where we transport fluids, proteins, and fats through the lymphatic channels back to the bloodstream. A limited lymphadenectomy is reported with codes 38562 through 38564, and it consists of removal of only the lymph nodes. A radical lymphadenectomy is going to be reported with codes 38700 through 38780, and this involves removal of the lymph node glands and surrounding tissue. Now, at the top of page 645, this is where we talk about the regions of the lymph nodes. The question that I asked when we started class was, what are the 5 regions? And it's listed here on page 645 for you, the different regions. You'll notice that code 38700 and 38720 are your unilateral codes. You'll notice that modified radical neck is removal of all the lymph nodes routinely removed by radical neck dissection. This would be considered a unilateral procedure. Your limited lymphadenectomy may be bundled into a more major procedure. When this occurs, only the major procedure is reported. Your superficial code would be the 38500. Your codes 38510 and 38525 are your deep codes. And your internal mammary code is the 38530 code. Under mediastinum and diaphragm. And let's take a moment just to look at page 646 in your textbook. You'll notice figure 22-2 gives you a great illustration of all of the nodes and where they're located. Over on page 647, the mediastinum. What is the mediastinum? You'll see here that it is the area between the lungs. And where does the mediastinum and the diaphragm subsection fall in the CPT book? It actually falls directly after your cardiology subsection. So you'll notice on page 259 in your CPT book, it's just a small section for mediastinum and diaphragm. The mediastinum subheading is divided by procedures, and it includes your incision, excision, and endoscopy category. The procedures are reported with the codes of 39000 through 39499. Codes are based on the surgical approach taken to perform the mediastinotomy, either cervical or across the thoracic area of the sternum. And you want to pay attention because the primary distinction that's made in the excision codes are listed under the mediastinum subheading. Your excision codes vary according to whether a tumor or a cyst was excised. Also, under the repair category, you'll notice that this is the only subheading under the diaphragm is the repair category. Excuse me. The repairs consist of lacerations and hernias. And how are the hernias of the diaphragm divided out? You'll notice that they are divided out by the type of hernia, the age of the patient, neonate or other neonate, and the approach. Is it transthoracic or combined, which could be thoracoabdominal. And that is it for chapter 22. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to email me. Let's move on to chapter 23, which is the digestive system. And if you look in your CPT book, it's on page 265. In your textbook, let's turn to page 652, and let's start with the digestive system. You will notice the format for the digestive system is divided by anatomic site. One moment. You'll notice the digestive system is divided by anatomic site from the mouth to the abdomen. peritoneum, and omentum, plus the organs that aid the digestive process. Your subsection will include the codes 40490 through 49999. So again, according to anatomical site, beginning with the lips and ending with the abdomen, peritoneum, and omentum is how you will find that these digestive codes are divided. Some of the organs also that aid the digestive process are included in this subsection, such as the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. What you also find in these subsections is the abdomen, the peritoneum, the omentum, and the hernias. On page 653 in your textbook, we start off with a vermilionectomy. This is a shaving of the lip. The first subheading of the digestive subsection. So if you look on page 265 in your CPT book, the very first subsection is lips. And we have excision, repair, and other procedures. Why would a vermilionectomy need to be performed? It might be because a person or a patient has cancer of the lip. What is a cleft lip? A cleft lip is a congenital defect when the muscle and tissue of the lip didn't close properly. So a chyloplasty is a lip repair, and you would find that under the repair category. Turn over to page 654, the tongue and floor of the mouth. You will notice that incision and drainages are based on the location of the abscess, cyst, or hematoma. What you also notice under the categories here, you will see, as we've seen throughout the book, are excision, repair, and other procedures. Over on page 656, the dentoalveolar structures and palate and uvula. These procedures consist of drainage of abscesses or cysts and excisions of lesions. Your palate and uvula subheading contains codes for excisions and repairs. And please note that your grafts are reported separately. And what is the uvula? It is the structure at the back of the throat. All right, and then the salivary glands. These codes are divided based on the gland the procedure is performed on or the number of glands involved. Imaging guidance is reported separately. On page 658 in your textbook, and 268 in your CPT book, pharynx, adenoids, and tonsils. You will notice that the categories here are based on where the biopsies are found in. Is it an excision or a destruction? And the incision category is for a peritonsillar abscess. Please note that your incision codes are also divided on approach. Is it intraoral or external? The esophagus on page 660 in your textbook, and on the right-hand column on page 269 in your CPT book. The esophagus, the key billing points here that you want to know about is the removal of foreign bodies of the esophagus is the approach. So what type of approach? cervical, thoracic, abdominal, or endoscopy. You want to make sure that you know the device or the method that was used, how each device works, and whether the dilation was endoscopic or non. Also beware, diagnostic endoscopy is always included in a surgical endoscopy. The esophagoscopy is limited to the esophagus only. The scope may be advanced into the stomach, but it goes just short of the pylorus. If the scope passes beyond the second portion of the duodenum, you would report the endoscopy using small intestine codes. When you're doing an endoscopy, again, it's coded to the farthest extent. Your stomach. Page 664 in the textbook. And page 281 in your CPT book. Some of the procedures are performed on the stomach are opened when the stomach is in full view to the physician, and others can be done laparoscopically. Be certain to make sure you identify the approach that is used. The gastric banding is adjustable because the band is a hollow tube that can be inflated and deflated with the administration of fluid. Your intestines on page 665. Be sure to watch for codes here that are listed as separate procedures. The endoscopy codes are for the small intestines. Again, as I mentioned earlier, endoscopy codes can be found throughout the digestive system subsection by anatomical site. But when you're coding, you want to make sure that you're coding to the furthest extent of the procedure. Once you've determined the anatomic site, other factor guides might be needed for using the correct code. So you might want to query the provider. Some terminology that you might want to be aware of for endoscopy is paying attention to your notes. Your notes will define the specific terminology that need to be used. In particular, make sure you read the notes that are preceding your codes 45300 through 45399. You want to understand the terminology. It is crucial to coding the procedure appropriately. On page 669, figure 23-18, you'll notice the illustration there of how a colonoscopy measures how many feet. So this shows you what is the route the endoscope is inserted during a sigmoidoscopy. Your endoscope is passed through the entire rectum, the sigmoid colon, and possibly part of the descending colon. So again, the parts of the anatomy are involved. You want to know what they are, because there might be possible inclusion of the terminal ileum. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like it, but your intestines are pretty large. They're up to, for sigmoidoscopy, it's up to 26 inches that you see. Colon procedures and screening. For colonoscopy procedures, to determine how it was performed, you need to know, is it through a colostomy, through a colotomy, or through the rectum? And for a colorectal cancer screening, you want to use your HCPCS books, and you'll find these codes. Take a look at them, and make a note in your CPT book for colorectal cancer screening codes. See HCPCS books. For laparoscopy and endoscopy, some of your subheadings have both laparoscopy from the outside and endoscopy from the inside procedures. So pay attention to that. The hemorrhoidectomy and fistulectomy codes. Basically, what's a hemorrhoid? It's inflammation of the area around the anus, and they can occur inside or outside. There are different degrees of the severity, and the physician should determine the degree of the severity. The abdomen, peritoneum, and omentum subheading in your CPT book. These include repair categories that contain your hernia repair codes. You'll notice that the hernia codes, when you're using the abdominal approach, are reported with codes 49491 through 49611. Hernias repaired through laparoscopy are reported by another set of codes. Some types of hernias are inguinal, umbilical, incisional, epigastric, and lumbar. And that's it for the digestive system. So your assignments for next week will be to read chapter 24 and 25, do all of the even numbers in your workbook, end of chapter review, and evolve exams. Again, if you have any questions about any of the assignments, please don't hesitate to email me. Thank you very much for your time today, and have a good week.